After playing the Alan Wake games and absolutely falling in love with them, I realized that I had been sleeping on Remedy for years. I just knew I had to start diving into their catalog after that, starting with their very first game. Starting with the very first game anyone remembers, Max Payne. I was so excited to play this game. I knew they had it ported to the PlayStation Store a while ago, but I've always been a fan of physical media, and I wanted to play the game how it was released. So I bought a used copy online, waited weeks for it to show up, and then it was finally here. They sent the wrong version. I wanted it on the PS2 since the last PC I owned had a clear color case, so the digital version it is! Keep that in mind going forward, as there were a few technical issues I had with this game, and I'm not entirely sure if it's because it's the ported version, or because Max Payne is just old as the hills. But anyways, I played through the game and I'm very excited to talk about it, so let's get into this review of Max Payne. There will be spoilers in this review, as well as spoilers for Alan Wake 1 and 2 in the very last section of the review, in my final thoughts. Before playing this game, I had heard fantastic things about it. I'd also heard fantastic things about Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Look at this game, man. What the fuck is this Fuck you, fuck off! Listen, I'm not saying San Andreas is a bad game. I'm just saying that I'm not a fan of it because it is a house of cards. The only way it holds up is if you know how to work around how dysfunctional it is. So it's safe to say I had my doubts about Max Payne's praises. But damn, this game is fun. This is one of the most accessible and easy to pick up games from the PlayStation 2 generation I have ever played. But that's not to say it doesn't have any flaws though. The movement is slippery, there are some encounters that are too long or way too finicky, which I'll get into, and I'm not a fan of having a literal swap to best weapon mechanic. It's literally admitting to having a ranking of weapons, making the player preference almost completely irrelevant. Also, the vertical controls for the right stick are defaultly inverted, which you can easily change in the settings, but it is worth mentioning. The checkpoints are also a bit ridiculous with how far you can be sent back, which honestly might just be a loading issue from the PlayStation 2 hardware. And this game has that classic feeling of bullshit enemy placement. It's really not that bad, since the core of the difficulty is based on how many enemies you face and where they are, and if you die from the bad enemy placement, well then now you know where they are. The only real consequences from the placement is you die and have to respawn, or you have to take some painkillers, which there are plenty of in each level, along with ammunition. The gameplay also feels as timeless as it does because most of the time they play to the game's age and limited resources. With a camera as sensitive as this and with gameplay centered on non-stop movement, precision-based aiming just wouldn't work. So for most of your shots fired, the game basically just says, yeah, that's good enough, and registers them as hits. The clear sense of direction and exclamation point objective markers contribute to this as well, making this game feel so much more straightforward and understandable despite the exclusion of a minimap or compass. I think my favorite part of Max Payne's gameplay though is how ridiculously cinematic it is. It knows exactly what kind of game it is and wears it on its sleeve, with set pieces that are simultaneously very goofy and very rad. This is especially true with the bullet time mechanic. It is a fun gameplay mechanic, but the built-in diving button that can activate shows you just how self-aware this game is. And with Rockstar having bought the IP in 2002, who's to say Max Payne's bullet time didn't inspire Red Dead Revolver's Deadeye, released in 2004? So the biggest issue with this game's age is just how ambitious Remedy is as a studio. 9 times out of 10, they'll have this wacky idea and pull it off tremendously well. That 10th time though, you're tightrope walking in a game where the floor is covered in soap. I understand the dark and traumatic emotions of the protagonist that the game is trying to evoke here. It's a great idea for a set piece, but way too ambitious for a game older than me. And at first, the constant sound of his infant child crying is heartbreaking. But as you keep fucking up the Minecraft parkour, and it takes 20 times longer to get through this set piece than intended, it just gets very irritating. And that only snowballs because I'm trying to walk across this bullshit slippery balance beam, pissed off because I suck ass, and there's a baby crying in my ear, which makes me fuck up even more. These 2 blood trail sections of the hallucinations took me 5 minutes each, and it would have been way longer if I didn't mute my headset volume. Apart from that though, there are only a few other technical issues in this game. When I used automatic weapons to take out multiple enemies at a time, the frame rate got fucked. You can't just jump onto this train, you have to dive onto it. The hit detection did get a little goofy at times. The game sometimes can't tell when you want to roll instead of jump, as they use the same button with the only difference being directional input. And the time it takes to load the comic sections just kills the momentum. But other than that, it's honestly very innovative for the time it was released. It sounds pretty goofy, but I was honestly impressed by the jacket flapping, the footsteps in the snow, the facial details, and how they hide this one very goofy face when something serious happens to not break the immersion. Usually what draws me to a game is the story and the characters, and I have to say that the characters are very one-dimensional in this game, but that's not really a bad thing in its case. They're written really well for what this game is, especially with their dialogue. It's no surprise that Max is the best character in this game, as all of his lines of dialogue are pretty much excerpts from Alex Casey echoes. He's almost equally, but differently as eloquent as Alan Wake, and his narrations are skyrocketed in quality by James McCaffrey's amazing voice, as well as some of his fantastically written one-liners.
Woden was there in the crowd, standing by the sidelines. It wouldn't be over till the man with the patch would say so. He'd say the right words. I knew he would. He'd better. Woden grinned smugly. It was the grin of a winner. That made two of us.
I love how Max's dark past and depressive personality shows in his humility, claiming that he only survived so many gunfights because of luck. My only problem is that some of the enemy names can be pretty hard to keep track of, like Angelo Punchinello, Jack Lupino, B.B. Hensley, and the Bronco brothers. But that's easily made up for by the best line of dialogue in gaming history.
I'm Mr. Beast.
And to mention it really quickly, this game is hilarious, whether it be the enemy dispenser, the soft elevator music after spilling blood like you're gonna paint with it, this goofy ass baseball sound effect, or the incredibly self-aware names like the club called Ragnarok. I do have to say though that if you're looking for a good story in a video game, keep looking. Because Max Payne's story, while presented in a very creative way, isn't my favorite. I love how they use comic book panels to tell the story instead of cutscenes, as if it were the other way around, these models wouldn't be able to carry the same emotional weight. The comic also has a beautiful and sort of blurry art style that I am in love with, and reminds me of the comic book Arkham Asylum was based on. I know I shit on that comic a lot in that video because I don't really like its story and it's really edgy, but I think everyone kind of unanimously agrees that the best part of that comic truly is its amazing visuals. I like the idea of Valkyr being an old super soldier experiment, and I do also really appreciate how, in the story, even the smallest of things come back with narrative relevance. Like Candy Dawn videotaping her clients for blackmail, including the Inner Circle. But that is also to its downfall, as I'm not a big fan of how the random junkies that killed Max's family were from the Aesir Corporation, or how convenient it is that the guy whose family was randomly killed by Aesir is the same guy who takes down Aesir 2 years later. And maybe this should be in the gameplay section, but while I always know where I'm supposed to go, I never really know why I'm going where I'm going, in relation to the plot. It's almost like I'm just fighting to get from one cutscene to the next. I also think that this game's plot doesn't really let things last as long as they should. Like, we barely ever interact with Mona Sachs, and on like our third time meeting her, she dies immediately. And they do this twice with the Inner Circle within the span of like 5 minutes. Alfred Woden was teased throughout the entire game, and as soon as you get some closure on him in the Inner Circle, they all die immediately, only to find out that Alfred is still alive. There's no time to sit on their reveal or their deaths. And I'm just not a big fan of how Alfred is basically just a plot device to get the NYPD off of Max's back. But I do really like the idea of Max being framed for the murder of Alex Balder and trying to clear his name and get revenge, while also being on the run from the police. And one of my favorite parts of this game is how my least favorite criticisms a game can have doesn't apply. If there is one term that sends me into a fucking frenzy, it's ludonarrative dissonance. Half the time people use it, they don't even know what the fuck they're talking about. This term is mostly used to criticize games like Max Payne or Uncharted, where you mow down armies of people in a way that contradicts the plot. The problem is, that doesn't fucking apply to either of these games. In both games, you're killing people that have orders to murder you on sight, but especially in Max Payne, as he doesn't care about his body count and is just on a revenge mission. I'm not saying this in a sarcastic or hyperbolic way, but I am almost completely sure that back in 2001, Max Payne was a 10 out of 10 game, and one of the best games of the generation, given how innovative and just straight up fun it is. And it is still really fun, much more than I expected it to be. But after 23 years, I do think it's lost a bit of its spark, as every old game does. So I'm giving Max Payne an 8 out of 10. But I am afraid. Remedy, Sam Lake, and Dan Houser, I got the message, okay? It is a 10 out of 10. I am giving this game a 10 out of 10. Please understand that this game is a 10 out of 10. These people are too powerful for me to criticize their game. Like, look at this! They created a book character called Alex Casey in 2010. Look at this advertisement in a game that came out 9 years earlier. Remedy has made games where a character is almost trapped in his own book. Look at this cutscene.
All of my past was just fragmented still shots, words hanging in the air like balloons. I was in a graphic novel. Weapon statistics hanging in the air, glimpsed out of the corner of my eye. Endless repetition of the act of shooting, time slowing down to show off my moves. The paranoid feel of someone controlling my every step. I was in a computer game.
In this hallucination scene, he's stuck in a loop. Or is it a spiral? This guy that gets killed in the beginning and sets off the plot, Alex Balder? Oh, you mean like Fat Bob Balder from the Old Gods of Asgard? Or what about Project Valhalla, which shares a name with the Valhalla nursing home that the old gods stay in? How about the fact that the computer code you have to find in this game is 665? The same code you need to unlock this door in Warlindor Studio, and one of the rooms you need to get into at the Ocean View Hotel. But what truly scares me is how personal it got. It started off small. I had a similar haircut to Alan Wake when the first game came out in 2010. And like 2 years after I started growing my hair out, Alan Wake 2 came out where he has an almost identical haircut to me. But the threat really became clear when I found an important NPC in Max Payne that looks almost identical to my real life father. So again, for the safety of me and my family, I'm giving Max Payne a 10 out of 10. Remedy, please don't hurt me.